Now we are going to learn about the process and services based species conservation. As an alternative to species based conservation planning, process and services based approaches focus on conserving or restoring critical processes and habitat conditions that have been altered by human activity. In this approach, the explicit goal is the process sediment balance, flow regime, longitudinal connectivity, with the implicit assumption that these processes, if restored to their natural state, will help conserve species of concern and biological diversity at multiple spatial scales. It is based on the assumption that protecting key processes has an impact on the protection of key ecosystem services derived from freshwaters, including protection of water supply and mitigation of catastrophic floods, along with recreational and associated economic opportunities. Umbrella species conservation. When habitat is preserved to meet the needs of an umbrella species, it helps preserve habitat for many other species. This primary species serve as an umbrella for others. Large species with large home ranges like tigers and other top predators are good umbrella species. The umbrella species concept is very simple. By protecting areas large enough to maintain a viable population of usually a single large bodied and wide ranging species, sufficient habitat can also be maintained, which ensures the viability of most other species in that area. The expectation for umbrella species conservation approach is that managers will focus conservation actions according to umbrella schemes, which are the areas or sites supporting one or more potential umbrella species. For example, if a top umbrella species is found in 20 out of 25 sites in a planning area, then those 20 sites, 80% effect are where conservation actions should be focused. However, if 80% effort proves too costly, then a representative subset of those sites or umbrella species occupying fewer sites may be used. Species whose conservation provides protection for many co-occurring species. Traditionally, umbrella species have had large area requirements, large animals and carnivores. Idea is that if we conserve enough habitats for the umbrella species, then other species should be covered as well. The conservation umbrella approach focuses management efforts according to individual species that may confer protection to a larger community. This approach can help guide the management agenda towards sustainable goals by maximizing conservation returns per unit effort. It also allows managers to focus on a small number of species as proximes for protecting a larger community. So, endangered species conservation is the next topic. An endangered species is any species that is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. Trying to preserve single species threatened with extinction may also be used to achieve umbrella conservation and their habitat together. This can be done by listing of endangered species which are critical foci of conservation attention and receive special attention in priority devising systems for conservation both at national and international level. The World Conservation Union for Nature and Natural Resources, the IUCN, has various editions of the Red List of Threatened Species, which are the only available global factual summary of threatened species, although seriously incomplete in their coverage, and serve as an indicator of likely species loss. Biodiversity indicators conservation. An indicator species is an organism whose presence or absence, population density or dispersion, or reproducible success can indicate habitat conditions that are too difficult to measure for other species. Indicator species are used to indicate effects of contamination, population trends, and habitat quality. The assumption is that if the habitat is suitable for the indicator species, it is useful for others. However, such species is different in its habitat needs and habitat niche, so the effectiveness of indicator species to fully represent a wide range of species and habitats is limited. Indicators can measure and monitor impacts on species, habitats, and ecosystems, as well as management commitment and process, impact reduction, and positive action. Biodiversity indicators are not an end in themselves but an input into an adaptive management system. The following terms are examples of biodiversity indicators. Biodiversity indicator species. Globally threatened and data deficient species and area restricted range species, invasive non-native species that are threatening to ecosystems, habitats, or species used by local populations. Indicator species can tell about presence of one species indicates presence of other species and the measure richness of well-known taxonomic groups and use as surrogate for sympatric poorly known group. Hence the use of biological surrogates as proximes for biodiversity patterns are gaining popularity, particularly in marine systems where field surveys can be expensive and species richness. It is also an important approach for selecting sites for conservation planning. For example, prioritizing habitats for conservation based on species richness only observed or predicted at particular sites, that is the alpha diversity, might result in a selection of species rich sites containing similar subsets of species. If so, rare species or those only present in species poor sites could be excluded from protection. These authors also showed that the types of surrogate used defined by its relationship with the target type higher taxa, where a taxon acts as a surrogate for taxa at lower taxonomic levels. Cross taxa, where a taxon acts as a surrogate for another taxon at the same taxonomic level, or subset taxa. Surrogate, where a taxon acts as a surrogate for entire target community. Habitat or ecosystem indicators. Operational site overlap with conservation priority areas containing globally threatened or restricted range species. Amount of land within the operational site that has a management plan with a biodiversity conservation focus. Contribution to habitat conservation. This type of indicators can tell about the health of the ecosystem through providing information about the species used to indicate environmental conditions and species that are most sensitive to disturbance or stressor of interest in the ecosystem or in the specific habitat. Biodiversity hotspot conservation. Biodiversity hotspots are areas that support an especially high concentration of species endemic to the area. Biodiversity hotspots conservation. Biodiversity hotspots are areas that support an especially high concentration of species endemic to the area, found nowhere else in the world and experiencing rapid habitat loss. These areas are the world's most biologically rich areas, hence recognized as important ecosystems, and they are important not only for the rich biodiversity but equally important for the human survival, as these are the homes for more than 20% of the world's population. Hence, hotspots are characterized by both exceptional levels of plant endemism and by serious levels of habitat loss. To qualify as a hotspot, two strict criteria must be met. These criteria include it contains at least 5% of endemic species of vascular plants. Hence, hotspots are characterized by both exceptional levels of plant endemism and by serious levels of habitat loss. To qualify as a hotspot, two distinct criteria must be met. The criteria include: first one, it contains at least 5% of endemic species of vascular plants. 5% of endemic species of vascular plants, and two, to have lost at least 70% of its original habitat. So, ecosystem service cooperation approach. Before moving on to that, once again, Read what are the criteria for endemism. First one, it contains at least 5% of endemic species of vascular plants to qualify as a hotspot, and it have lost at least 70% of its original habitat. Now, which are the ecosystem service conservation approach? Ecosystem approach is an essential tool for biodiversity conservation. Ecosystem approach is an essential tool for biodiversity conservation and an important concept to convince people about necessity of nature conservation. It is a method for sustaining or restoring natural systems and their functions and values. An ecosystem approach is goal driven and it is based on a collaboratively developed vision of desired future conditions that integrate ecological, economical, and social factors. Therefore, ecosystem services need to be protected together with species and habitat because they are essential for human well being. They are a currency to value ecosystems and promote their sustainable use, and they offer a value added strategies to supplement presently established biodiversity conservation. Ecosystem approach in relation to other components of biodiversity. Biodiversity conservation is achieved through integrating gene, species, and ecosystem conservation. However, the species and gene approach focus on particular component of biodiversity, and this alone couldn't address biodiversity conservation. The following are some of the limitations of the species and gene approaches of conservation, leading us to pay attention for the application of the ecosystems approach to biodiversity conservation. Inadequate recognition of vitality of ecosystem function for biodiversity. Two site-specific management without considering interlinking with other sites. Failure to integrate cultural, economical, and social factors in biodiversity conservation. Failure to value public goods and services obtained from ecosystems, such as services like ecosystems are home for wild genes, maintain hydrological cycles, generate and maintain soil, provide sources of beauty and inspiration, regulate climate, store and recycle nutrients, and many others which could not be valued in marketplace. Inability to coordinate with relevant sectorial interests like agriculture, environment, forestry, fisheries, health, nature, conservation, etc. On the other hand, ecosystem approach has the following distinctive features. Ecosystem approach is an integrated strategy for management of land, water, and life resources. Ecosystem approach has a comprehensive nature to protect, preserve, and utilize ecological resources, communities, and economic sustainability sustainability and it provides a framework for planning and decision making that balances the three objectives of CBD of conservation, sustainable use, and suitable sharing of benefits. In ecosystem approach, people are placed at the center of biodiversity management. The flexibility of the approach with respect to scale and purpose makes it a versatile framework for biodiversity management. The ecosystem approach underlines the importance of intersectorial cooperation, which is essential for better management of natural resources. The ecosystem approach can help policymakers appreciate the importance of the vital ecosystem services that depend on biodiversity. The ecosystem approach stresses that local people should be involved in decisions about natural resource management. The ecosystem approach is a liberating concept for the conventionalist because of its nature and science, because of its potential to mainstream conservation into human affairs. It is an integrated approach that it considers the entire range of possible goods and services and attempts to optimize the mix of benefits for a given ecosystem and also across ecosystems. It emphasizes a systematic approach, recognizing that ecosystems function as whole entities and need to be managed as such, not in pieces. An ecosystem approach takes the long view that it respects ecosystem processes at the micro level, but it sees them in the larger frame of landscapes and decades working across a variety of scales and time dimensions. An ecosystem approach includes people that it explicitly links human needs to the biological capacity of ecosystems to fulfill those needs. Although it is attentive to ecosystems, process, and biological thresholds, it acknowledges an appropriate place for human modification of ecosystems. An ecosystem approach maintains the productive potential for ecosystems because it does not focus on production alone but views production of goods and services as the natural product of a healthy ecosystem. In general, an ecosystem approach does not prevent other management or conservation approaches such as single species or genetic conservation programs, but could in fact integrate them as well. And ecosystem approach principles. The ecosystem approach is a strategy for the integrated management of land, water, and living resources that promotes conservation and sustainable use in an equitable way. It is based on the application of scientific methodologies, human beings, an integral part of many ecosystems, and using adaptive management to deal with the complex and dynamic nature of ecosystems. Therefore, because of its holistic nature, the ecosystem approach has the potential to mainstream conservation into general human affairs. However, this does not mean at the expense of conservationists losing sight of their own priorities. Rather, it integrates all aspects of conservation endeavors, landscape, and you're in my blood, you're in my breath, you're in my heart. Ah, 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 ah. അവരെടുക്കുമ്പോൾ നന്നായിട്ടുണ്ട്, ഞാൻ എടുക്കുമ്പോൾ എന്തോ കാലിൽ കൊണ്ടുപോലെയുണ്ട്. എന്ത് ഇങ്ങനെ ആ പാട്ടിലൊരു രണ്ട് ഉണ്ട്, അത് അവരെടുക്കുമ്പോൾ നന്നായിട്ടുണ്ട്, ഞാനത് പാടുമ്പോൾ കാലിലെന്തോ കൊണ്ടുപോലെയുണ്ട്. ആ ശരിയാട്ടോ. Ecosystem approach has the potential to mainstream conservation into general human affairs. However, this does not mean at the expense of conservationists losing sight of their own priorities. Rather, it integrates all aspects of conservation endeavors.